Now, Leaders' Questions under Standing Order 36. And I call on Deputy MaryLou McDonald, please.
Taoiseach Storm Barra is raging outside and bringing massive disruption to families, workers and businesses, especially in those counties under red and orange warnings. And so today and tonight people need to stay safe. Nobody should take any chances or risks. And I think it's important that we pay tribute to our frontline workers. After 18 months of heroism, they now find themselves again in the eye of the storm, again risking their own safety to keep us safe and to keep the show on the road, and we thank them. Of course, our children aren't at school today because of this exceptional storm. And we are now in winter, and our children and teaching staff have been freezing in classrooms, wearing hats and scarves during the school day with windows wide open in an attempt to keep them safe. We're nearly 2 years into this pandemic, but government still hasn't delivered a plan for proper ventilation in our schools. It's been clear for some time that Hepa filters have an important role to play in ensuring schools have clean air. They remove contaminants and viruses from the air and help reduce airborne transmission in classrooms with poor ventilation. The World Health Organization, the European Centre on Disease Control, and indeed the government's own expert group on ventilation have all emphasised the value of Hepa filters in keeping schools safe. Yet, instead of listening to this expert advice and installing Hepa filters in schools, the government's approach is, as you put it, Taoiseach, at your press conference on Friday, you said, to open the windows and that. Now, parents and school staff must have been shaking their heads in disbelief. This refusal to act on filtration in schools reminds us of your government's reticence to accept advice on mask wearing at the start of the pandemic, and then your failure to incorporate antigen tests until the 11th hour in the fight against COVID. And again, we see no sense of urgency, no forward planning, no common sense from government on the issue of ventilation in schools. Taoiseach, we know that COVID is an airborne virus. That's been known for some time. We knew that schools would be a greater challenge in the face of a more transmissible variant. The rates of infection among school-aged children has shot up, as you know, in the last few months. So the writing's on the wall, and your government has had ample time and every opportunity to get things right, and yet you waste these opportunities. In December last year, Donnacha O'Leary called on Minister Foley to ensure the schools were provided with devices over the Christmas break to ensure children returned to safely ventilated classrooms last January. He was ignored. Indeed, it took 9 months for the government to act on CO2 monitors. These monitors are badly needed, but they don't clean the air. They have to be backed up with a proper filtration system. So we don't have another 9 months to wait for government to get Hepa devices into classrooms. Taoiseach, tá sé thar am inis chuna bheith doríre faoi éireáil ceart na scolanna agus a cuineáil na páistí agus na ball fearna sábháilte. Tá sé thar am ag an rialtas scagarí Hepa a áils na seomraí ranga có topi agus is féidir. Taoiseach, do you accept that you must move beyond opening windows as a plan for ventilation in schools? And will you commit to immediately commencing the installation of Hepa filters in classrooms?
Well, first of all, I would like to to take this opportunity again to put on the record of the House the government's deep appreciation for all those on emergency services who are doing so much across the country to protect life and limb, and especially in the southwest at the moment, in helping our communities to cope through Storm Barra. Our emergency services, ESB staff, council employees, community workers, all doing so at considerable personal risk, and I want to pay tribute to the National Emergency Team for the preparatory work that they've been engaged in now for well over the last week, planning and preparing for what is a very challenging and difficult and varied storm, and to them we owe an awful lot indeed. And could I also say that in terms of the situation pertaining to COVID, I have to say from the outset, putting all the noise and the attempts to undermine government or attack government, which is a legitimate position from the opposition, if it wants to pursue that road, the most important collective message we as a House can give to people today is to take your booster vaccine when you're offered it. Vaccination is protecting people more than anything else against severe illness, against hospitalisation, and against admission to ICUs. And the booster vaccination have been shown to produce very, very strong antibody responses and are likely to provide protection against severe disease, hospitalisation and death from most variants, including Delta and Omicron, at least. And I just want to make the point that the reason I'm saying this is that in the week commencing the 22nd of November, there was 208,000 appointments offered. About 80,000 turned up. And last week, 180,000 appointments, 93,000 turned up. So the same urgency doesn't seem to be there in terms of availing of the option to take the booster as was there when we were offered the first dose and the second dose. And if you look at the over 75 group, people have been taking up the offer, in that group where people have been taking up the offer of a third dose of COVID-19 vaccine in high numbers, we are seeing significant reduction in the incidence of disease. So it does work. The booster will, I think, have a really significant impact on Delta. I can't stress that enough. That's the one message I want to get across today, above and beyond everything else to do with COVID-19. In relation to ventilation and our schools, the Minister for Education has at all times adhered to expert advice in respect of ventilation. And whilst at times it might be tempting to lampoon the idea of fresh air, that actually has been the number one item on that expert advice, that where possible, fresh air is the most effective form of ventilation. Of course, that has limitations in the context of cold and inclement weather. And the Minister for Education has provided resources, very substantial resources to schools, and will continue to do so. And schools will be in a position, and if they wish, if it's suitable, to buy Hepa filters for classrooms. But I would point out, if you look at SAGE, for example, SAGE's advice on Hepa filters, which is the expert body in the UK, they're saying there's a need for better data on real-world application to support these technologies, may be a viable solution in spaces where it's difficult to provide good ventilation. And it's saying a lot of the application of HEPA filters will depend on the configuration of rooms and certain situations. The point I would make, Deputy, is this, that I've noticed throughout the course of the pandemic, every now and again someone comes up with the magic solution. Invariably, there's no one magic silver bullet to deal with COVID. It's a combination of efforts. And right now, it seems to me, looking at the data, the most effective thing we can do out there is to encourage people to take your booster vaccine when it is offered.
Well, of course, Taoiseach, there is no single silver bullet, more's the pity. There is no singular answer, including vaccination. And although I am never one to lampoon either fresh air or the need for vaccination and for boosters, it's absolutely imperative. But I asked you a different question. I asked you about ventilation and air quality in our classrooms. And I mean, between removing contact tracing from schools, a very sluggish response to teaching supply, mixed and confused messaging on children wearing masks in schools, your record in dealing with staff and children in the classroom isn't good. And I think to say to staff and children that the answer is to shiver in classrooms is not acceptable. These filters, these HEPA filters, are one item, an important item in the toolbox that we have to keep people safe. So I've asked you a very straightforward question, and I've quoted the expert advice, Ceann Comhairle. The World Health Organization, the European Centre on Disease Control, and indeed the expert group that your own government appointed recognise that these filters are an important intervention. So I want you, instead of taking a laissez-faire approach again with schools, I want you to commit that the government will ensure that these filters are rolled out. Use the Christmas break, use the opportunity of the kids being on holidays to install these ventilators and to ensure that we have clean air, that you don't have frozen children and staff members, as one action, but an important action, in an array of
Thank you,
things that we
Deputy.
will have to do to keep our children safe.
Taoiseach.
I don't know whether you heard my initial reply, but the funding will be made available if schools wish to purchase Hepa filters in given situations. And I know that the Deputy accused us of mixed messaging and so forth. I think you need to be very careful before you accuse anyone of mixed messaging, because I did watch and hear you as you were beamed in from New York in response to the government measures. And I was none the wiser at the end of your interview as to whether you approved of those public health measures that government decided or not.
I'm sure you were very
see,
clear
this is
on
more
that.
of the mixed messaging.
I couldn't have been clearer.
I don't agree with the government's approach, and I won't go against the public health message. You couldn't come out clearly like Michelle O'Neill did in the North, albeit I don't agree necessarily with the stance taken there, where Michelle O'Neill was saying there's no need for any more new restrictions. You kind of took the halfway house again, and you've been really the hallmark. Your utterances and articulation, unfortunately, throughout the pandemic, have been the hallmark of mixed messaging from the get-go.
Yeah, okay.
Deputy Alan Kelly.
Taoiseach, I want to ask you this morning,